traveling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and of sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of the imagination. There's a signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the narrow mind.
Tuesday night, the 25th of April. Welcome back to Unchained Radio, The Narrow Mind. My name is Gene Cook. I'd like to welcome you. If this is your first time, I'd like to thank you for joining us. The Narrow Mind is a weekly apologetics program that takes place every Tuesday night, normally at 6 p.m. on the West Coast. But tonight we're going to do a 2-hour special. I was doing 2 separate programs. The Atheist Hour at 5 p.m., which is the time it is right now. It's actually 5:03. And also The Narrow Mind. The Atheist Hour was a program that dealt specifically with the topics concerning atheism. But as I mentioned in the email that I sent out today, I've decided to officially boycott atheism. And so if I'm going to be explaining what exactly I mean by that in a little while. If you'd like to call in tonight, we are going to be taking live calls. Our phone number is 1-800-466-1873. Let me give it to you once again. You can also find it on the top of our homepage at unchainedradio.com. But that toll-free number is 1-800-466-1873. If you'd like to save us a few pennies, actually more than a few pennies, if you'd like to save us some spare change, you can call us on our local number at 619-793-5180. This broadcast originates out of Southern California. My name is Gene Cook, as I mentioned already, and I'm the pastor of Covenant Baptist Church in San Diego. Covenant Baptist Church is a Baptist church that is covenantal and Calvinistic, for those of you who delight in theological jargon. And you can also find our sermon ministry on the internet at sermonaudio.com. Well, I've got a lot of things to talk about because I haven't been on the air for the last 3 weeks. As some of you know, as probably many of you know, I was in Africa for 2 weeks. I traveled to East Africa between March 29th and April 12th, and then I returned for just a few days, and I traveled out to Dallas. And I'd like to talk to you about both of those trips. First of all, I traveled to East Africa. I arrived in Dar es Salaam, and Dar es Salaam is the capital city of Tanzania, or as the locals call it, Tanzania. And it's a Swahili-speaking region, although I'd say maybe about 50% of the people that live there actually speak English, and so there's communication in the English language. But this is my 5th trip that I've made to that region in the last 2 years. And a couple of trips back, about a year ago, we had actually purchased a plot of land there that is 5 acres large. 5 acres big, and I say large because if you live in Southern California, 5 acres is that's an unimaginable piece of land. Especially if you live near San Diego, you're accustomed to living in tract homes and suburbs. You don't even know how big 5 acres is. But we actually purchased a piece of land there, 5 acres, with the purpose of starting a church and starting other ministries such as an orphanage and a Bible school. And we've got a whole bunch of ideas. I say we, mainly me. I've got a bunch of ideas for that land. And this last trip, we actually set up the tent. We purchased a tent. Actually, we purchased 3 tents. We purchased a tent that is, it's about 71 feet long and about 39 feet wide. And I have some pictures of that, but I haven't had an opportunity to place them up on the Unchained Radio photo gallery, which I will be doing hopefully soon within the next few days. And it seats about 200 people. And so when I was there the first couple of times, I actually met with a couple of guys. It's kind of, I mean, it's providential how I met these guys. There was a guy that actually had been listening to my sermons and on sermonaudio.com, and he invited me to come out and do a pastor's seminar. Well, when I got out there, I realized very quickly that the guy wasn't 100% upfront with me. First of all, there was no pastor seminar. And second of all, I wasn't staying in the lovely Sea Cliff Hotel, which is a 5-star hotel on the coast of the Indian Ocean there in Dar es Salaam. But that wasn't a big deal. So the guy actually had me speak at a couple of different Pentecostal churches, Assemblies of God churches. And the Assemblies of God churches in East Africa are not like the Assemblies of God churches here in the States. Well, first of all, they would never have a Reformed Baptist speaking in them here in the States. But secondly, they are more of an extreme version of Pentecostalism. A lot of radical stuff going on there, casting out demons and all this other stuff. Kind of freaked me out the first time I was there, but it's actually part of the culture there. They're very superstitious, and they are, for the most part, most of them are Pentecostal, word of faith. Excuse me. They believe that American Christianity is best represented by TBN. So, if you can imagine, TBN is, I had to tell these guys, TBN is something that we laugh at. TBN is not a representative of American Christianity, nor is it a representative of biblical Christianity. But what happened was, I realized that this guy that had called me out there, he wasn't exactly the most honest Christian that I'd ever met. And so after a period of working with him for about 1 year, I decided that it wasn't in my best interest to continue to work alongside of him. But what was interesting is in that time frame, the Lord, I believe, brought me in contact with 2 other men, actually 3 other men, 2 pastors and 1 man who is really best suited for the position of deacon. He's a businessman. And he brought me in contact with these 3 men, Pastor Romanus, Pastor Emmanuel, and Gregory Howley. Gregory Howley is a businessman there. He owns a small printing company. And I began talking to them, and they told me that they had been praying about going out on their own and starting a ministry, because they had been involved in a church for the last, one of them 12 years, the other one for 15 years, a mega church there. And one of the largest churches and most well-known churches in that area. And they had become disenchanted with the church and with what was going on there and what the mega church was all about. Even in a poor region, a mega church still has a lot of money, and there is virtually no accountability there in the way that churches are established, the way that churches are set up, and it all derives from a lack of sound biblical teaching. And so I met these 2 guys and began to talk to them, and I said, well, I'd be interested in working with you. So why don't you guys start a church in one of your homes? I figured, let's see what these guys are made out of. And sure enough, they started a church in their home, and it started out with, first 20 people, and then 30 people, and then 50 people. And by the time that I came 1 year later, this last trip, we were ready to have our first service at the location, at the new plot. This plot is in a city called Bunju, and it is about 20 miles from downtown Dar es Salaam. Although it's 20 miles, it still takes an hour to get there, because there's a 1-lane road going each direction, and there are way too many cars on the road. And so they were very excited. I was coming out now. We were going to set up the tent. I had purchased a tent and had it shipped there last year, and it had been in storage. Actually, 3 tents, 2 for classrooms and 1 for the main meeting place for the congregation. And so we named the church Goshen Village Bible Church, or Goshen Bible Church, because the area there has a nickname. It's called Goshen, or Gosheni in Swahili, which is taken from the biblical land of Goshen. If you are familiar with the book of Exodus, you'll know what Goshen is. And what happened was we set the tent up, and on 2 weeks before Easter Sunday, not Palm Sunday, but the week before that, which I think would have, I can't even tell you what the date was without looking at the calendar. we actually had our first service. That would have been April 2nd. We had our first service there, and we had 70 members in attendance. And we had our second service on the 9th, which was Palm Sunday. And on that service, we had 67 adults and 20 children. And I'm really excited about what's going on there. There's still a lot of learning that needs to be done, but while I was there, we hosted our congregation, our Goshen Bible Church, actually hosted a pastor seminar. We kind of threw it together at the last minute, sent out some invitations. We had 37 pastors the first day and about 45 pastors the second day. And I decided that I was going to do an overview of the book of Daniel. And I was just amazed at how little Bible knowledge these third world countries have. I mean, we find something similar in Mexico, but it's not as bad in Mexico because we're fairly close here to the Mexican border. We do interact with Mexico. But to give you an example of Bible knowledge and lack of Bible knowledge in this area, one of the pastors stood up. There was a question. There was a question about submitting to the government. You know, we're studying the book of Daniel, and there's a couple of circumstances in there in which Daniel is called upon either to confront the wickedness of the government with his own Christian convictions. And yes, I did say Christian convictions. And the first time is when he is, what is he doing? Oh, he wants to just eat vegetables. He wants to refrain from the king's table. And so he asked permission. They granted to him. But the second time, Daniel's enemies, I'm sure you know the story, decide that they're going to make a law against praying because Daniel is an avid prayer warrior. He prays 3 times a day. And so they construct this law, and basically Daniel has to go head-to-head with the civil magistrate. And so there were some questions about that, and I appealed to Romans 13 about submitting to authorities and showing that every authority has been, every civil magistrate, that is, every governmental authority has been appointed by God. And you should have seen their mouths drop open. They couldn't believe that wicked rulers were appointed by God, kind of like some Arminians here in the States, but that have a very low view of the sovereignty of God. And so we talked about that, and he said, well, maybe, this pastor said, now this is a guy that's pastoring a congregation, well, maybe the words of Paul were just for that time and place, and they don't apply to us. And I said, come again? And he said, well, maybe the book of Romans really wasn't directed toward us. And I said, well, we got a problem here. The book of Romans is directed toward us. You can be sure of that because it's recognized as the Word of God by the body of Christ, the pillar of truth that God has established. And furthermore, the civil magistrate that Paul was writing about was much more wicked than our governments that we have today. Remember, the book of Romans is written to Christians living in Rome, and the government during that time period was not friendly toward Christians. And so if Paul is saying that Nero is appointed by God, how much more, Bill Clinton or Saddam Hussein? Some would include George Bush in there, but I'm not going to go that far. So it's kind of interesting, the level of education there among the pastors. In fact, my heart really goes out to them. At the end of the second day, I wish you could, well, I've got some pictures, so you will see it if you're interested. Just check back at the photo gallery on the website here in a few days. But the first day, Gregory, one of the men that I'm close to there, comes up to me and he says, Pastor Gene, this guy over here, this pastor, points him out. He says, now, he's going to be asking you a lot of questions because he's one of the more educated guys in their group. And so be sure you take time to answer questions. I said, no problem. One of the things that I can appreciate is somebody who's asking questions because I can tell by the questions that are being asked whether or not people are listening. And they began to ask questions. This guy's asking questions, and at first he's kind of antagonistic. You can tell when somebody is not necessarily asking questions because they're they don't know, but they're asking questions because they don't agree with you. So I'm teaching through Daniel, and he starts asking questions. Well, at the end of the second day, this guy gets up. At the end of the conference, this 2-day seminar, we did an overview of the book of Daniel. The main guy that organized the conference, that sent out the invitations for us, he stands up and he says, well, while we're waiting for the bus, is there anybody that would like to come and talk about how they've been affected by this seminar that Pastor Gene has taught? And there was about 5 pastors that went up there. But the first pastor up there was this guy who was initially asking questions because he obviously didn't agree with me. And the first thing he says is that he's very grateful for the conference, and he actually said that he wishes that he could remove everything that he'd been taught and refill his brain with what I was teaching him. And I took that as a great compliment. And all of these guys, all of these pastors, they look to him as one who knows. And so I've made a commitment. I made a verbal commitment to them that I would come back in the month of January, and that when I come back, we will have at least a 4-day seminar. And I will bring some fellow Christians and some fellow pastors with me. So I'm putting out the invitation out there. Dustin Seegers and Trey Austin, Trey Frog, and who else out there is a pastor? You guys, I need some help here. I'm gonna get David Fairchild. He doesn't have a choice. He has to go, and a few others. But I'd like to go out there. I guess it helps if I turn off my cell phone here. I'd like to go out there and actually do some teaching, some serious teaching. I'm talking like 7 or 8 hours a day. By myself, I could only do about 5 hours a day, and then I'm wiped out. But I would like to get some other men here included with me and go out there and bless these people. So if you guys are interested, I'm putting out the word. And if you're not a pastor, but maybe you just have a heart for missions, you have a heart for that region, or maybe, you might want to pray about it. Is the Lord directing you? If you're a Christian, you'd like to go with me, I'd be more than happy. I'd like to take as many Christians with me as possible. And if you are interested in that, you can call me off the air at our church phone number, which is area code 858-268-4372. Or you can just look up Covenant Baptist Church in San Diego on the internet, and you can call me there. And I'd be more than happy to give you the details, tell you how much it costs, what's involved, and get you on board. And I've got the Lord has really given me a large vision for this land that we've got there, and I'd like to see this place just transformed. In fact, I'm convinced that the East Africa is ready for Reformation. And I would really like to see that. We've got the room there. I'd like to start a school, start teaching some sound theology, and get these guys going, get them fired up. I mean, they are so thirsty for the Word of God that it's unbelievable. So thirsty, and yet there's no good teaching out there. I mean, everywhere I looked, I couldn't find it. So even in the Christian bookstores, it's missing. Let me give out our phone number once again. That is 800-466-1873. Taking your calls live. Taking your calls live, 1-800-466-1873. So I returned on April 12th and spent a few days here at home, and then I headed out to take care of some personal business in the Dallas area. And while I was in Dallas, I had the privilege of hooking up with some of our listeners. Actually, a couple of guys that I've actually interviewed before. You may recognize these names, Dr. Zachary Moore and Derek Sansone. And Monday night, which was 17th, I had dinner with them. And we went out to P.F. Chang's, shared some Chinese food and a nice cold beer, and had a great time. At least I did. I'm assuming they did. I've got a picture of us together, too, that Zach Moore has sent me. And so I'll be putting that up on the internet also as soon as I get a chance. But had a good time, just kind of hung out with these guys, got to know them a little bit. And I made it clear that I didn't really want to talk about theology too much. Or, not theology, but, our differences. But Derek Sansone seems to be very interested in our differences. And so he couldn't help but bring up the topic of belief and unbelief. And so we talked a little bit. And I found it interesting that Derek... he thinks that he has reduced the transcendental argument for the existence of God down to the teleological argument. And I basically told him that I just don't think you understand the transcendental argument. In fact, he sent me an email with his reduction argument, and I'm still convinced that he really doesn't understand what it means, what the argument is all about. One of the ways that I know that he doesn't understand what the argument was all about is that when I asked him how so, how is it that you've reduced the argument down to the teleological argument, and he said, well, I've reduced it. This is how I've reduced it. Basically, he says, according to the transcendental argument, that God is a precondition for logic and morality. And yes, that's true. But at the same time, he says, well, the teleological argument, of course, is the design argument that those things which show design obviously must have a designer. And so God is a precondition for all those things that show design. And so, for example, the flower, God is a precondition for the flower. And so, since God is a precondition for the flower, then, and you're saying that the tag argument means that God is a precondition for logic and morality, they're virtually the same. And I said, no, Derek, the difference is that when you argue against God, you don't use flowers to argue. You use logic. And so even the atheist appeals to logic and reason in his attempt to disprove Christianity. And so that's that made it clear to me at that point that he really doesn't understand the argument. But I will probably talk to him when soon. I'll probably have him on as a guest so we can discuss this further. I got a PM here from my producer. Okay. I don't know. Okay, Brandon. Did I talk to I'm trying to remember. Oh, Brandon. Yeah. That brings me to the second thing. I had lunch with two guys while I was in Texas. Well, I had dinner with Zachary Moore and Derek Sansone, but then I also had dinner with two Christian listeners, or actually lunch with two Christian listeners. And we met at a Italian restaurant and enjoyed a pizza together. And I got to talk to them. So it was kind of interesting seeing the contrast in our listeners. You know, you got two guys that listen because they've been involved in the past, and obviously they enjoy polemic and they enjoy the content of what we're doing here. But then on the other hand, you've got two guys that listen because they're in agreement with what's going on. So kind of interesting the difference. And I really enjoyed meeting with both of these people, groups of, I guess, all four of these people on both of these occasions. And so I would, there's a few other listeners, though, that I didn't get to talk to that are out in Dallas. I know we have a guy, I think his name's Anthony, who is attending Dallas Theological Seminary. And I know we have another guy named Kevin Harris who works at one of the Christian radio stations. He's also in Dallas, and I'd like to meet him. And I met with Shane and Brandon. Those are the two believers that I listen to. Shane is called up in the past. And there's somebody else. Tony. Why Not and Why, the guy on our forum. Why Not and Why, the 4-point Calvinist. Ha ha, right? Tongue in cheek there, Tony. Just to ruffle your feathers a little bit. Who believes that Jesus died for the whole world, but yet I'm not sure in what way, but still unclear on that. But at the same time calls himself a 5-point Calvinist. He lives in Irving, Texas. And I think that there's one more that I can't think of. But we got quite a few friends out in Texas. I like Texas. Texas is nice. In fact, I'm going to be going back out to Dallas sometime in July for just a couple of weeks. And I'd like to hook up with our listeners. And so if you're out there in the Dallas area, I would be more than happy to hook up with you and talk to you. Phone boards are kind of quiet tonight. Maybe that's because my lips are flapping so fast. The phone number, once again, is 1-800-466-1873. We are doing a 2-hour program tonight. We're already 30 minutes into the first hour. And when you hear me play some music between the segments here, that means I'm taking a drink, and I'm probably going to talk about something else when I get back. And so I mentioned today in the email that I sent out that I was boycotting atheism. What's that all about? Boycotting atheism. I'm not boycotting atheists, but I am boycotting atheism, which means I'm not going to be doing the Atheist Hour program anymore, at least not for the time being, because it has become increasingly evident to me that A, no one understands our argumentation, and B, atheists cannot account for logic and reason, but yet they appeal to logic and reason to try to disprove God. Last Sunday, which was April 23rd, we have a big pagan celebration here in San Diego called Earth Day. And when you walk into Earth Day, you feel like you're walking into Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, literally, you are walking into, or maybe a combination of Mars Hill and Sodom and Gomorrah, because you've not only got all of the vile lifestyles that are on display, but you've also got all of the wacky religious beliefs of the day. And it's quite interesting. Lots of people, I mean, you know, there's so many people there that you're constantly, you know, weaving and bobbing, trying to stay out of people's way as you're walking. And what they do is they open up Balboa Park, which is a huge park. It's kind of like San Diego's version of Central Park, I suppose. It's a beautiful park. They open that up and they have live music playing, and they have food, and they have all of your tree hugger organizations out there, all of your abortion rights activists. They got your Hindus, your Buddhists, your Scientologists. Every pretty much wacko comes out of the woodwork in San Diego for Earth Day. And so we've gone down there several years. I haven't been down there for the last 2 years, but I used to make it a habit of going down there every year. And so this year I decided to go down and take my recorder with me, my MP3 recorder, and do some interviews. And so if you actually look at the homepage at unchainedradio.com, you will see there are several new MP3s that have just been recorded last Sunday on April 23rd. In fact, let me take a look. I'll kind of tell you what they're all about here. The first two that are listed here are interviews with, the first one is an interview with a representative of a group called the 12 Tribes. Now, I'm calling it the 12 Tribes Cult because I did a little bit more research on it when I got home. And in this first MP3, the guy, I asked him if he believed in the Trinity, and he's very evasive. He says, I believe that the Father is divine, the Son is divine, and the Holy Spirit is divine. So I assume that was kind of an affirmation of the Trinity without using Trinitarian language, but I guess I'm a little bit naive still. And because they don't hold to the doctrine of the Trinity, they don't believe that the Son is God, the only true and living God. And so I've classified them as a cult, as well as many others have classified them as. So the second one, the first one, I'm just kind of asking some questions about the beliefs of the system, and you can hear the music playing in the background. They also go by the name the Merrymakers Caravan. And the second clip is a clip where I'm actually talking to some of the members. Chris Curtis, who's a member of our church, actually got into a conversation. I kind of jumped in and was recording that in the beginning, and then I got involved in the conversation. The third clip here is an interview with some Muslims concerning the subject of atonement. Now, the reason why the subject is directed toward the atonement is because they had a lot of anti-atonement literature sitting on their table. The third, or the fourth clip here is Paul Manatta asking some questions at the Atheist Coalition booth. Now, the Atheist Coalition had a booth out there, and they've got their T-shirts and their bumper stickers and their big King James Bible and a bunch of crystals and other paraphernalia. And they're out there peddling their atheism. But apparently they don't like to be challenged too much because as Paul Manatta was asking questions, they asked him to get away from the table. Sir, can you please step back and go somewhere else? And there was a woman there. You'll hear her on the MP3 there. She basically, Paul was taking the old man atheist. I call him old man atheist because he was an older man. I mean no disrespect in calling him that, but he was, I don't know what his name was. He was sitting there, and basically Paul took him to task, and within a few minutes just showed him the absurdity of his own belief system. And then when Paul began to explain what this man was saying, and by the way, I didn't get the first part of that dialogue, and so maybe if Paul Manatta is out there listening, he can call in and tell us the part that I missed. But apparently he got this guy to admit that child molestation wasn't necessarily a moral wrong. And he said to the effect, well, if that's what you want to do, if you want to molest children, go ahead. I'm not going to do it because I don't think it's right. Well, when Paul told the woman, the main woman there at the atheist table, that this guy said that, she turned around to him in disgust and said to this man sitting next to her, did you say that? And he lied. He said, no, didn't say that. And he also lied about a couple other things. So hopefully we'll get Paul on to discuss that. And then Paul Manatta, after he moves away, he basically, concedes to this woman's request. He moves away. There's a young college girl there that actually is talking to Paul because she's intrigued by what Paul is saying, and she wants to know more, and he continues to talk to her. So those are the clips there. I encourage you to listen to them. And let me give out our phone number one more time. Our phone number is 1-800-466-1873. That's 1-800-466-1873. I'll be back in just a moment taking your calls live.
Hey! Yes, I did. To disco down and check out the show. Yeah, they were dancing and singing and moving to the grooving. And just when it hit me, somebody turned around and shouted, "Play that funky music, white boy. Play that funky music right. Play that funky music, white boy. Lay down the boogie and play that funky music till you die." Till you die? Yeah. Well, I tried to understand this. I thought that they were out of their minds. How could I be so foolish? How could I? To not see I was the one behind. So still I kept on fighting. Well, losing every step of the way. I said I must go back there. I got to go back and check to see if things still the same. Yeah, they were dancing and singing and moving to the grooving. And just when it hit me, somebody turned around and shouted, "Play that funky music right, boy. Play that funky music right." Play that funky music.
All right, it is 39 minutes after the hour, and you're listening to The Narrow Mind. We're having open phones tonight. We're talking about whatever's on your mind. And so I would like to go to our phones. Our phone number, once again, is 1-800-466-1873. We've got Zach Moore, the man that I was speaking of earlier, calling from Dallas, Texas. Zach, welcome to The Narrow Mind.
Hi, Gene. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Very good.
What's going on?
Well, I was just really kind of sad to hear about the boycott, the big boycott.
Well, I'm not boycotting atheists. I'm just
Right,
boycotting
yeah.
atheism.
But this means that the atheist hour is no more, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We got some feedback on the line, and I've got somebody helping me right now that just he's on the 1-800 number. He's on the 1-800 number. So turn down the one. There we go.
It sounds really good right now.
Okay. Yeah,
Right.
she just got you. I got somebody helping me for the second time, so it can be kind of tricky over there if you're not familiar with it. So, I decided that I wasn't going to do the atheist hour anymore just because I haven't found anybody that seems to understand, or at least any atheist that seemed to understand our line of argumentation.
Right. Well, it seems to me that if that's the case, then wouldn't you really want to go the other way with it?
Well, the
it sounds
Christians
like
understand the argumentation.
Right, but so the idea is that you've got the tag,
Yeah.
which is completely devastating to atheism, right?
Yes.
Well, it sounds like you should be mounting a big campaign, like, maybe writing a book and making the show like 5 days a week or something.
Well, we've already got probably, I don't know how many Atheist Hour programs we have. It's the same thing week after week, so I'm not sure how many programs or literature we would need to compile to actually make the point. There is a book out there. Obviously, I don't think that I could do better. Greg Bonson has a book called Van Til's Apologetic, and there are other books on the subject as well as debates. So I would encourage, atheists to continue to interact, but I just don't want to devote a whole hour where I'm trying to explain what the argument actually is, and nobody's really getting it, or even if they say that they get it, they just say, well, I don't know where logic and reason comes from.
Yeah, well, actually, when I was on your show for the first, I have to say that I'd never heard of the transcendental argument before I started talking with you.
Okay.
So it is really not, popular. I'd never heard of it. So it was, I think most of the people that you get on your show, they hear you talk, and you don't really, like when you start talking about it, you don't really frame it and say, okay, well, this is called the transcendental argument, and this is the way it works, and do you understand this? You just sort of, you kind of go into it very casually, and I think a lot of people, like for me, for example, like it took me a long time to figure out exactly what you're saying, because I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah, well, I actually try to make it very clear. I mean, even if you haven't heard of the argument, you still, I mean, haven't. I'm assuming that atheists have sat around and thought about, well, I'm using logic and reason, but where does it come from? And so you don't necessarily need to, have all the ins and outs of the argument per se in order to be able to answer the question.
Well, but I mean, like, thinking about, like, I'm talking about the laws of logic, as you would say, material, or no, you would say immaterial, I would
Right.
say material object. I mean, that I don't think that's something that has ever crossed anybody's mind. Never crossed my mind.
Yeah, well, see, I guess this is part of our atheist awareness campaign that we basically, see, most atheists, they call up and they tell us, well, the reason why they don't believe in Christianity is because it seems unreasonable or because the Bible contains contradictions.
Right.
So they assume, obviously they have to assume logic in order to make these types of claims against Christianity. And we're simply asking, in a material universe or in an evolutionary world, how do you account for these things? I mean, it's not a real difficult question. And the only answer that we get two answers, basically. Number one, we don't account for them. They just exist. Or number two, they're man-made. They just help. They're a tool that we use that man has come up with.
Right, yeah.
Go ahead.
And I would say probably both of those are, I would agree with both of those statements in sort of different ways. But, I mean, I'm just saying that it takes, I don't think really, there's no sort of like counterpart argument on the atheist side that addresses logic and reason, or the lack of it in the Christian worldview, because both worldviews have to assume it. So it's something that I think that atheists just don't really, like maybe if you, I don't know, maybe if you just did a show, have you ever done a show just on the tag, just laying out the tag and playing it?
Yeah. We've actually done a seminar. I did a 3-hour seminar where I just taught on the subject, and then I posted that on the website, and that's actually in the archive.
Yeah. Maybe if you anytime you have, like in the future, if you do have atheists on, maybe you could just let them know, hey, give them a link to that show and say, look, this is the argument that I like to use. Because I just think that they're coming on and a lot of them, like I know John Loftus never heard of the tag before he talked to you also.
Well, then maybe he shouldn't have a website called Debunking Christianity. I mean, how can you debunk Christianity if you haven't even...
Because the tag is a very, very fringe argument. I'm telling you, I never heard of it, and it took a lot of work for me to find information about it.
Well, it's been around for a long time.
I know it has. It's been around for a while, but it's one of these fringe arguments that no Christian really seems to be using. So it's not something that we really interact with a lot.
Yeah. But now that you have interacted with it, how do you?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you do with it?
Oh, with the tag?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there's all kinds of things you can do with the tag. I mean, I don't really want to get into it right now.
Okay.
But I did have one other question for you. Have you heard of the War on Easter?
No, I haven't. Have not.
Okay. Have you ever heard of the movie, or the documentary, The God That Wasn't There?
I have heard of it. I saw something on the Infidel Guy's website, but I haven't watched the movie yet.
Yeah. It's a documentary done by a guy named Brian Fleming, who's doing a sort of like a thriller. It's kind of like the Da Vinci Code, but not really. It's sort of instead of where the Da Vinci Code goes in and examines the Gnostic history of Christianity. Mm-hmm. The Beast goes in and looks at like the Jesus mythicist position. You're familiar with that, like Earl Doherty and his stuff?
Yeah. Are you talking about the alleged counterfeit or copycat claims?
Yeah, well, the claim that there are a number of other savior gods that existed in pagan mythology, and that some of those elements can be found within the Jesus, the Gospels and stuff like that.
Right.
Well, anyway, he during the course of filming this movie, he put together a documentary where it's basically just a documentary that part of it shows the mythicist position, and part of it is just sort of a examination of Christianity itself. Mm-hmm. And he came up with this idea for the War on Easter, sort of a tongue-in-cheek parody of like the War on Christmas that Bill O'Reilly promotes. year in, year out. And the idea was to take copies of his DVD, that's The God That Wasn't There, and hide them on church premises. You can go to any church and hide copies of this DVD, like in bushes or wherever, for Easter Sunday. And it was actually quite successful. His goal was to get 666 copies hidden in churches all around the country. And actually, I think some of them were international. I know there were a couple in Britain that were done. And all over the United States, I'll take some credit for some that were done in Texas.
Well, if a church is out there having an Easter egg hunt, then they deserve to have their kids find a copy of that.
Yeah, there was a Presbyterian church that was having an Easter egg hunt that I hid one at.
Oh, you actually hid one.
I was surprised at that.
So, why, if you're an unbeliever, why not? I mean, if these Christians are just enjoying themselves and gathering together on Sunday and hiding eggs and finding them, what inspires you to go down and try to disturb that?
Well, the idea behind the whole, campaign, you'd call it, is that religious fundamentalism in any form is dangerous. And there's an argument made by a guy named Sam Harris about the 9/11 hijackers and how that was a symptom of religious fundamentalism in Islam, but that you really can't distinguish between one religion versus the other. I mean, fundamentalism is fundamentalism, whether it's in Christianity or Islam. And so the idea that Brian Fleming had was, well, I live in America where most people are Christian and not Muslim, so Christianity is sort of the devil that he knows, and it's the more clear and present danger to America. And so in an effort to just get some Christians to start asking some questions about their faith that they wouldn't normally do, to go sort of stash some of these DVDs around churches and see what kind of response it got.
Interesting. And did they take the DVDs home and watch them?
Well, I can only assume so.
You haven't heard anything further on it?
I don't know if there's been any direct feedback posted to the website. It's waroneaster.org if you're interested in checking it out.
Okay, I'm going to have to check it out.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any feedback posted. I know there are also flyers posted on churches that had like the website and email addresses that Christians could go and let them know if they'd found them and what they thought of it or whatever. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting. I wanted to see what you thought about it.
Yeah, I haven't really heard of it, but I'll check it out. And I think it's kind of silly, actually. I think that if Christians are silly enough to plan Easter egg hunts at churches, then they're probably gullible enough to watch the video and leave Christianity.
Okay.
I mean, so you're probably going to have a high success rate for your efforts.
Yeah. All right.
I wouldn't be surprised. All right, but when we approach atheists, we want to engage with them because we're convinced that as Christians, and especially as Reformed Christians, we believe that Christianity is the only defensible worldview that is available to man, and it's a shame that when we approach something like the Atheist Coalition booth, that they don't want to talk to us. They want us to get as far away from the booth as possible because they're very uncomfortable with what we're saying. So,
well, now here's a question for you: was Paul on his best behavior?
Yeah, he was.
Okay.
Yeah, he wasn't being rude. He wasn't being rude.
Okay, good.
So he was being a gentleman. Now,
all right, good.
He's kind of aggressive by nature.
Yeah.
But he was being a gentleman. So
okay, well, that's good.
Yeah. All right, Zach, it was good talking to you.
All right, you too. I'll see you later.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Look ahead as we pass, try and focus on it. I won't be fooled by a cheap cinematic trick. It must have been just a cardboard cutout of a man. 440, cast it from the record stand, walking in
have our friend Paul Manata on the phone. Yeah, Paul Manata calling from Oceanside, or where are you living now, Paul?
Escondido.
How you doing, man?
Good.
Good.
How about yourself?
Good. Were you able to hear the conversation with Zach Moore?
I was, and I'm glad he was concerned about my behavior, and I'm also glad that he was borrowing from the Christian worldview and saying that if I was on my best behavior, assuming standards and norms and things like that, so that
like loving
both
your
those
neighbor
things
as
make me
yourself.
happy.
For example, loving your neighbor as yourself.
Yes. Well, and also best implies, you can be better, better than better and best, and assuming norms and standards which exist in this ever-changing world. So that was encouraging to hear. And
I bet you were also
liked-
encouraged. I bet you were also encouraged when I said that you were behaving yourself.
Yes. I tried to behave myself. It's kind of hard when people tell me that, I'm just an animal, and they have bumper stickers mocking our God, and they like to take cheap shots at when the Christian, high school girls come up there and try to bully them and slam them, and on top of having all their anti-Christian literature up there. And then when I come, espousing anti-atheist stuff, they all of a sudden get upset and act like, we shouldn't be attacking their position or saying mean and nasty things about atheism, like they can't account for why I shouldn't jump across the table and bite the guy's nose off.
Now, why would you want to bite the guy's nose off?
Well, I wouldn't want to.
No, why would you bring that up in your argument?
Yes. Well, because there's Christian high school girls asking them questions like where they go when they die. And this atheist, the one you called the old man atheist, I guess that's the name we're using for him since we don't know who he was. But the old man atheist said, well, where do you think dogs go when they die?
Right.
And I mentioned to him just in passing, because I thought I'd let him continue talking with the high schoolers, because they were, I think, a little bit more evenly matched. I said, well, that's disanalogous. Just because a dog might, go down to earth and that's it. Once the dog only goes around once and that's it to its life. That says nothing about humans. Dogs aren't humans, and so just because the dog dies doesn't have anything to say where humans go when they die. And he said, well, we're all just animals. So we're all animals, so it's all the same. Anything that happens to the dog happens to us, which is obviously what's called a hasty generalization. And so I said, well, is it morally wrong if a dog bites another dog? And he, of course, correctly said that it wasn't. And so I said, well, then what would be morally wrong if I jumped across the table and bit you in the face? And
did he think that would be morally wrong?
Well, he said he first said he doesn't like morality coming from a God. And I said, well, I'm not talking about, I didn't bring up a God or any morality coming from a God. I'm just talking about you. Do you think that would be morally wrong? And he said, well, I think it would be illegal. And I, of course, pointed out to him that just because something is illegal doesn't necessarily make it right or wrong, because if it did, then he would have to say it was, doesn't make it morally right or morally wrong. If it did, then he would have to say that at one point in history it was morally okay to beat your slave. That was good. It was a moral thing. It was morally okay to do that and to beat your property and get them to work harder for you and whatnot. And you'd also have to say via a reductio that if society at one point in the future got together and said, well, it's going to be legal now for 50-year-old men to have sex with 8-year-old girls. That's going to be legal now. So if that was legal, then that would be morally okay.
He didn't like that.
Well,
But he said yeah, it would, right?
Yeah, he said, well, I wouldn't like that.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want molestation. I would think that it was personally wrong. Then he kept trying to stay away from the morality, and I said, well, the molester, he would just think that it was okay for him.
Right.
So the molester wouldn't think that it was personally wrong, and at that point he said, well, then I'd tell you to go ahead and molest them.
Wow.
And,
That's the thing that he
I
lied
was-
about, right?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say I was sort of shocked that he would just so blatantly admit that, and I, turned around to the people standing there and said, this is the folly of atheism.
Mm-hmm.
This is a worldview where someone can just sit and say, well, I would just, if you want to molest a girl, go ahead and do it. And I let people know that, and when the lady that was there running the booths or in the center, when she heard me say that, she said, atheism doesn't teach that. We don't say that. And I said, well, yeah, he just said it. And that's when, of course, as you brought up earlier, that's when he lied to her face. He said, no, I didn't say that.
Interesting. Now, just for the record, we know that atheists, at least for the most part, atheists that we come in contact with don't endorse child molestation. But at the same time, what we're trying to demonstrate is that if you follow atheism out to its logical conclusion, if you're going to be honest, this is what you have to concede.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't personally have to concede it. They can always say, well, I, of course, don't like that, or it would be illegal, or that. But they would just have to concede, I think, ultimately, that there would be no objective reason, a universal moral absolute that exists, and that's a standard, and men are held accountable, etc. So they would give different reasons why. But yeah, the logical outcome of their position would be that whatever reason they gave is going to be arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because society, a bunch of people in society have said, so whatever causes pain, whatever causes the most pain, or whatever causes pain to the most number of people, come up with all sorts of different, ethical standards, that those standards are arbitrary.
Right.
Of course, there's no such thing as a norm, an ethical norm that exists in an ever-changing material universe. There's no such thing as universal norms.
Right. Right. There are norms, such as the what's the term that Bonson uses? Well, it's not just Bonson that uses it. The regularity of nature. There's another term that he uses, though, another phrase, that where nature operates on a
uniformity
of nature, right? Nature, as we know it, operates in a uniform manner. But when it comes to immaterial components such as logic and morality, you can't, like you said, you can't stub your toe on a moral law.
Right.
So in the material universe, or in the evolutionary worldview, which ultimately ends up as a material universe, you can't account for these non-material laws that are binding on the consciences and the minds of men. I think it's like I said, I don't know if you heard the part of the program where I was talking about why I've decided to discontinue the Atheist Hour for now. But it's the same old thing over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
They either say, well, logic is my axiom, and I can't explain where it comes from, or it's a convention of man. It's man-made. And they do the same thing with morality. Morality is just man-made. It's how we live in a world that is best suited for all the participants. But the problem for that is it doesn't give an explanation of why we should, why it's good or why it's virtuous to live in a world in such a way that benefits everybody.
Well, of course, as Dan Barker said, who came on your Atheist Hour, that the world itself, the universe and such, doesn't care. There is no real morality. So there's no real morality, and it's just imposed by humans. Mm-hmm. So that's how you have.
That's what he said. Yeah.
Differing morals throughout history.
Yep.
Because humans disagree. They disagree on where the reason should lead them. That's why you have the rationalists who end up in a radically different conclusions, such as pluralism or a dualism or a monism. They all agreed reason can lead us to truth, but they all led them to what they were different truths.
Right.
And so just with morality, maybe our reason and using our reason rightly, we can determine moral laws. But whose reason
Yeah.
should we use?
Exactly. Should we use Saddam Hussein's or Adolf Hitler or some other man who has his strong opinions of the way things should be? Or do we appeal to a standard outside of ourselves, that is, a standard given by God, namely the Word of God? Hey, Paul, I've got some other callers waiting. It's good talking to you again, though. All right?
You too.
Let's keep in touch. I think
Have a
I'd like
good
to
one.
have you on the show again sometime. We can spend maybe a whole hour talking about these things. And,
Yeah, I'd also be interested maybe in taking apart Derek Sansone's little reducing of the tag to the teleological argument. I think that'd be fun.
Okay, well, maybe we can have him on, and we'll talk about that. All right? Take care,
Sure.
bro.
You too.
All right, let me give out our phone number once again. The phone number is 1-800-466-1873. That is toll-free. We've got a couple of calls waiting, but we still got almost an hour left in the program. And so if you'd like to get on with us, please feel free to give us a call, and we'll take your call live at 1-800-466-1873. You gotta love Napoleon Dynamite. If you haven't seen that movie, I would definitely recommend going out and renting it and cuddle up on the couch with your sweetheart and have a good laugh together. But Napoleon Dynamite is the type of movie that you probably have to watch more than once to really appreciate it. I think I've watched it 5 times, actually. So you could say I'm a fan. Let's go out to North Carolina and talk to Dustin calling from NC. Dustin, welcome to The Narrow Mind.
Good evening, my friend. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing great. Have you seen Napoleon Dynamite?
I have. I thought it was fabulous.
Did you see it? Did you just see it once?
No, I saw it. I think I watched it 2 times.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
One of my elders really loves it. He thinks it's a little decrepit. I think the best part of that movie is when he took my boy's steak and threw it at Napoleon Dynamite, and it slapped him in the face and knocked him off his bike.
You want to hear something funny?
The best part of the movie.
You want to hear something funny about Uncle Rico?
Yeah.
In real life, Uncle Rico is a vegetarian. And
Really?
so, remember he was chomping on that
Man,
rare,
he was chomping on that thing.
and it was rare. Remember
It
he
was.
cut it, it was all
Blood coming
bloody.
out of it.
Yeah, he spit it out right after the scene.
Yeah. Did he really?
Yeah, he's a vegetarian. So what's on your mind, brother?
Oh, I'm just going to call and say it's good to hear you back. We praise the Lord for that. And my wife and I have missed listening to our Tuesday night apologetics feast. So,
Well, good. It's good to be back. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
so they received the Word of God well in Africa, huh?
They did. Very well.
Praise the Lord. I hope to be able to go over there with you guys sometime. I know there's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of teaching that needs to be done, and a lot of bad teaching that's been there and needs to be corrected. So I pray within the next couple of years I'll be able to go with you guys.
Yeah, I hope you're able to go too.
Dr. Moore had called in earlier and heard what he had to say, and I find it interesting. He said basically that we, namely atheists, should seek to avert fundamentalism in any form because it is dangerous. Well, I could say we should seek to avert atheism in any form because it's dangerous. I mean, more people have been killed in the name of atheism, especially in the 20th century, than all the people murdered in the atrocities committed in the name of Christ added all together. For instance, Stalin's Russia, he killed several million of his own people. Lenin, Mao Zedong killed about 30 million of his own people.
Wow.
Pol Pot, Cambodia. literally almost decimated the entire population of Cambodia by over 50% in the name of communistic atheism.
Mm-hmm.
So, and not to mention, over 40 million babies have been killed in the name of choice, which of course is rooted in the secular ideologies of humanism and materialism, which basically says that man is the supreme being and is a law unto himself. Well, if man's a law unto himself, then why can't one man say that fundamentalism is good and it's okay for terrorists to fly their airplanes in the World Trade Center, whereas, another atheist says, well, I don't think they should do that, and they take the position that Dr. Moore takes. I want to know, as Paul Minotta said earlier, I want to know where the straight stick is to measure that standard, whereby they take those movies and stick them in the little bushes for the little kids to find.
Yeah.
At these churches. Where's the standard? Why is fundamentalism in any form wrong?
Yeah. What did you think about that, by the way? I agree with you 100%. The truth is that they can look day and night. They're not going to find a standard unless they find the Word of God.
Yeah, that's right.
But what did you think about? I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm going to have to chew on that for a while. But atheists going down to churches and hiding videos.
Yeah.
I mean.
Well, I think
I don't really know what to make of that.
I think it shows a tremendous amount of hypocrisy.
How so?
Because they tell us that we should, for instance, on the website, when you reported about your ministry work in Africa, one of the atheists, or one of the unbelievers, I should say, I don't think he ever mentioned or identified himself as an atheist, he came on and said, you know what, Gene, you're just spreading lies over there, you're brainwashing those people. Well, how's that any different than what some of these other atheists are doing by, hiding in little Easter baskets out behind the bushes outside of the liberal church?
Yeah.
It's hypocritical.
It is.
And, my thing is this. Come on, guys, be consistent. If there is no God, why does it matter? If people are deceiving themselves, let them be deceived.
Yeah, I
and
mean,
why should you care whether they're deceived or not?
Right. They seem to be happy, right?
They're happy. Isn't utilitarianism the order and the rule of the day?
Yeah, it is a little bit inconsistent. Like I said, I'm going to have to chew on that and address that maybe next week because there's more there than meets the eye.
Yeah.
So I've got some other calls waiting, Dustin, but it is definitely good to hear your voice, and I'm glad you're enjoying the program.
That's good to talk to you. God bless.
God bless you too, man. Well, I've been playing some bumpers, some of my favorite music, and I played this one a little while ago, walking in L.A., and right when I played that bumper, we got a call from L.A. So let's go to our phones. Let's go to John calling from L.A. John, welcome to The Narrow Mind.
Thank you, Gene. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Well, the reason I called is because I was listening to your show. I got a link from infidelguy.com about your boycotting atheism, and I thought that was intriguing, so I decided to take a listen.
Okay. Are you an atheist?
Well, I'm a little bit more complicated than that, but I think that it's most accurate to call me an agnostic, I think.
Okay. So God could exist, and the Christian God could be real, but you're just uncertain.
Well, I think that it's very difficult to prove or disprove the existence of something that is supernatural, that is outside our ability to perceive it. So that's really where I stand. But
okay.
You had mentioned that the reason you were canceling the atheist hour is because you hadn't received any strong, I guess, or valid criticisms or counter-arguments for the teleological argument.
No, not the teleological argument. I don't use that argument because...
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm misspeaking. I meant...
The transcendental argument.
The transcendental argument.
Right.
Well, I would recommend going to Google and hitting transcendental argument or transcendental counter-arguments. And there's a lot of them.
Well,
but if you can't find any, there's a lot.
Yeah, no, I've found a lot, but what I've also found is that none of these guys really seem to understand. They can't grasp the argument. Let me ask you a question. As an agnostic person, somebody who's been exposed to the transcendental argument, how would you summarize the argument as it is used by Christians?
Well, that's kind of a trick question because different Christians use it in different ways.
Okay. Have you heard me use it?
No, I actually haven't. So let's actually get down to basics and
Okay.
present me with your traditional argument.
Well, this is how the argument goes. The argument goes like this, and this is, of course, a nutshell version, just to get to straight to the point. That in the Christian worldview, God is the creator, just as he says in the book of Genesis, and we, as Christians, we believe the Bible is true. We believe that man is made in the image of God, and as a result, man is given the ability to reason, because logic is something that proceeds from the very image of God. God is logical and reasonable in his nature, and since he makes man in his image, he gives man the ability to reason in a similar way, to think thoughts after his thoughts, in a similar way that he reasons. And historically, man has recognized this, that he is endowed with the ability to reason, and he's bound his fellow man by what has been called the laws of logic. Certain laws, such as the law of non-contradiction, just to name a basic one, that A cannot be non-A at the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
So when an unbeliever tries to argue, whether they're agnostic or whether they are an atheist or whatever they may be, if they're an unbeliever, if they're a non-Christian, they often try to argue against Christianity, presupposing reason, presupposing the existence of logic, just to give you one strain of the argument. And they make comments like, it's hard to prove the supernatural. When you make a statement like that, you're already assuming that certain things are provable, and you're assuming already logic and reason when you make a statement that certain things are provable or certain things are not provable. We simply ask the unbeliever, whether he's an atheist or whatever, how do you account for the use of logic and reason? Because it seems to us as Christians that the only way that you can account for something immaterial, such as logic, and yet call logic to bind the minds of your fellow human beings, the only way that you can account for something like that is if it comes from somebody, a personal being, such as God. So when the atheist tries to argue, or even when the atheist just engages in normal conversation, he is using reason, but we haven't found any atheist yet that can tell us where it comes from. Because
where
the laws
where logic comes from?
Right, the laws of logic, they are immaterial and they are universal, and they don't correspond to a materialistic world.
Logic doesn't correspond to a materialistic world?
No.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is you can't, as my friend Paul Manatta has said, you can't stub your toe on the law of non-contradiction. So you have these immaterial laws.
Okay, I see.
Right. Yeah. You can't put your finger on them. You can't point to them. But yet we all assume that they exist, and that's pretty much how we get along when we communicate to each other, when we argue with each other. But Christianity seems to be the only worldview that comports to the reality that logic actually exists, and we have an explanation for where it comes from.
Well, that's not. Let me disagree with you. I don't want to say that that's not true. That's not fair. But I would like to disagree with you and say that that's almost. You could almost say that that's a byproduct of any theistic belief. That the Hindus would believe that logic comes from the creator of the Hindu pantheon.
Well, I could argue against that by saying that, how do you know?
Well, that I would ask you the same question.
Well, because God has told us in His Word. He tells us in Genesis...
Oh, I'm sorry, Gene, you're a presuppositionalist.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, God has told us in His Word. I mean, if we're going to know where logic comes from, then the one who gave us the ability to reason logically and use the laws of logic, we have to know somehow. So he has revealed this to us in the Word of God.
But
See,
you do understand that presuppositionalism is not logical, because it relies upon a logical fallacy of presupposition.
Well, then why do you presuppose agnosticism?
Well, I don't.
You said you're an agnostic.
Yes. but I don't presuppose it.
Well, you presuppose that it's impossible to, or at least difficult to
No,
prove
not at all.
the
The
supernatural.
only reason that I am an agnostic and not an atheist is because I've looked at evidence, and I've looked at the arguments for and against atheism, theism, and Gnosticism, and all kinds of things, and I've come to the conclusion that it's impossible to prove one way or another. Now, I can be atheistic towards some God ideas.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I mean, it's very, very obvious, for instance, that the flying spaghetti monster is a man-made creation. Although I will probably get, thrown into the hell of this flying spaghetti monster hell for saying so. But, it's very obvious that that's a man-made creation. The guy admits it's a man-made creation, and et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I don't presuppose that agnosticism is true, because I don't have a presupposition. I looked at the material evidence that's been presented to me, and came to that conclusion.
Well, everybody has a presupposition. This is the myth of neutrality. None of us are neutral in examining the existence of God.
Why not?
We just aren't.
Okay, why not?
Because none of us are neutral by nature.
No, but we can be as objective as possible.
Well, you say that presuppositions or the presuppositional position is illogical.
Well, it uses a logical fallacy. A presupposition itself. Presupposition itself is a logical fallacy.
Okay, but don't you have to presuppose logic to make that claim?
No.
Well, you just did.
No, because I also have to object to your use of the laws of logic as intangible and things like that. Logic is not an entity. It's not something that exists. It's man's observation of the universe. It's the way we observe the universe. It's a tool. It's like a hammer. It's like anything else.
So do I have to use the tool?
I'm sorry, Gene. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Do I have to use the tool?
No, you don't have to be logical at all. As a matter of fact, there's a great deal of people on the planet who don't use logic at all, and they're, frankly, sometimes, just kind of, humorous and sometimes very dangerous.
Why is not using the tool humorous and dangerous if it's just a tool? I mean, is somebody humorous that doesn't use a hammer or a screwdriver?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the entire theory of slapstick comedy, is watching someone try to accomplish something with the wrong tool. It's the whole basis of Laurel and Hardy. It's the whole basis of Three Stooges, and the whole basis of all the modern comedies is watching someone trying to accomplish something with the wrong tool.
But what you're saying is that as a man, you can take or leave logic. It's not something that's binding on you as far as the discourse of conversation or polemic.
Oh, well, no, as far as discourse, certainly you don't have to make logical arguments. You can walk down the street and ask anybody. I mean, so few people are. I often make the joke as an instructor that I think that reading, writing, and arithmetic, there should be a fourth hour called reason that we teach kids, that they are able to because all that logic is ordering thought. It's creating arguments to prove points. That's all it is.
But,
and it was developed by it was developed by men.
Okay, so if it's developed by men, then I don't necessarily have to use it, as you said.
Oh, I think.
But then I'm somehow funny if I don't use it, or I'm humorous or dangerous if I don't use it.
You can be. I mean, but at the very same time, there are people on the planet who suffer from schizophrenia or suffer from a mental disorder, who are incapable of logic. They're incapable of making logical decisions.
Well, we recognize the difference there. We're not talking about incapacity or unconsciousness or something like that.
But
now,
if logic was something that was given by God, wouldn't logic be able to overcome something as trivial as physical limitation?
Well, not in a sin-cursed world. See, we have an answer for that also. In a sin-cursed world where everything is under the curse of Adam's sin, we find these types of things under the heading of sickness. And so we would expect in the Christian worldview to sickness and disorder. But coming back to, if I, for example, decided that I wasn't going to use logic anymore in the way that I addressed my callers on this program, would my arguments be any less valid than someone who does reason and think and speak?
I think so, yeah.
Well, see,
it would certainly put a heavy question on your I'm trying to think of the right word, on your
credibility.
A voice of authority. I'm trying to think of the right word.
Well, there you go. See, whether or not you realize it, basically what you're saying is that logic is something that's binding in all men, and those who choose not to use it, or those who reason in an inconsistent manner, are humorous, dangerous, and their arguments are invalid. And so making such a claim...
At the same time, I think, having listened to the program while I was on hold, there are the most powerful men in the world, who have not put themselves under the law of logic, who have ignored logic and have made decisions based on, and I don't mean this in a completely derogatory way, but I do mean it in a derogatory way, who make faith-based decisions, which are not based on reason or logic or evidence, but are based entirely on faith. Which
faith
I
is
find
not
entirely dangerous.
Maybe you're speaking of fideism, but Christianity, the faith that's spoken of in the Bible, is not fideism. It's not a blind faith. It's not a leap. It's actually faith that's based, it's a mental assent that is based on reason and logic.
Well, yeah, that is certainly, I will agree that is certainly your interpretation of Christianity. That you have, from what I've heard from the show tonight, you have definitely tried to make an attempt to be a reasonable person.
Okay, but
but that doesn't necessarily mean that Christianity leads to logic.
So okay, I need to get back to the tag argument here, because you concede that logic exists. You concede that it's a tool that man has devised to help him.
Yeah.
But then you turn around and you say that it's binding on all men, and those.
No, I did not say it was binding on all men.
But by saying that those who don't reason logically, that their arguments are invalid or less valid, and that they are dangerous and humorous, in effect you are
dangerous and humorous.
You're saying that it's binding on all men. You can't escape that.
No. I'm not saying that it's binding on all men. What I'm saying is that now I think we're confusing logic and physics. Now, physics is our description of the laws of the universe, which are not logic. Those are two different things.
Believe me, I'm not talking about physics. I'm talking about metaphysics. I'm talking about that which exists.
Yeah, but
that is not material.
Even the philosophers who first propounded logic in the way that we know it, the Greeks, they weren't Christian.
Well,
they weren't even inheritors of the Jewish tradition.
But they were made in the image of God, weren't they? And because
but they weren't Christian. And as a matter of fact, they were polytheists. They believed in many gods.
Well, we understand all of that. Just because, and maybe even the guy that discovered gravity wasn't a Christian either, but God's the one that instilled the law of gravity in this universe. So
I'm sorry, Gene, I'm interrupting you.
So what I'm saying is that, it was formulated by the Greeks, and it was discovered and arranged in such a manner that it could be comprehended. But men were reasoning logically all the way back in the beginning when somebody said, "My goat is dead and it's alive." And the guy said to him, "What? You're dead. Your goat can't be dead and alive at the same time."
Yeah.
So logic and has been around from the beginning. There's never been a time when a goat could be considered dead and alive at the same time.
Well, reasonable thinking has been around forever, but logic is the formalization of reasonable thinking, and that's just a disagreement of. I'm not actually disagreeing with you at all. I'm just clarifying a semantic point.
Okay, but I'm gonna have to disagree with you and stand my ground and say that as soon as you dismiss somebody's argument as being illogical, then you have already assumed that logic is binding on that person, that person has an obligation to reason logically. And if he doesn't, he lacks credibility, like you said.
Yeah.
So
is that what you mean by binding on all men?
Yeah. In other words, we all have an obligation to reason logically.
Okay. I I don't think culturally our culture encourages reason, but I would agree with you that in order to make reasonable arguments, it's important for us to make reasonable logical arguments.
Okay. Now let me ask you a second question. Do you believe, or maybe a third or fourth, or I don't know how many questions I've asked you. Do you believe in the theory of evolution?
Do I believe in the theory of, well, belief is a really tricky word. For the evidence that I presented, yes, I think that evolution is a phenomenon that's occurring in the world.
Okay, now a few moments ago you said that reason has been around ever since men have been reasoning.
Yes.
Or something to that effect. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, I appreciate that.
If man came from a monkey, or if man came from a lower, let's just say a lower life form.
Yeah, that's a lower life form is much more accurate, I think.
Okay. So one day, all of a sudden, he had an obligation to use reason and logic, but yet the day before, he didn't.
No, I think that's a rather simplistic mischaracterization of it.
Well, it is. Yeah, it's a sarcastic characterization for the purpose of making the point. I mean, obviously, it doesn't happen that way, but you get the point that at some point he's an animal, and then he becomes a human being, and now all of a sudden he has an obligation to reason logically.
Oh, not at all. We have evidence that animals reason.
Oh, really? And
oh, yeah.
So is it wrong?
There's examples of. There's a species of bat that lives in North America that when one part of the and I can't think of the right word for bat. My uncle is a big bat fan. When one part of the bat, let's just call it a bat tribe, because I can't think of the right word. When he eats too much of the food that they collect, they beat him up and rush him away, and don't give him. Don't let him come back and eat anymore. And they even do it for specific amounts of time, depending on how much on the grievances or the seriousness of the crime. And they actually recognize crimes and punish members of the tribe for doing it. Monkeys do the same thing. There are lots of animals.
Yeah, we call that instinct.
Well, why is that different from what human beings do?
Because animals don't commit logical fallacies?
Sure they do. Animals make mistakes all
Really?
the time.
Well,
There's another example of it.
Give me an example of a logical fallacy. Tell me the law that's being violated and the circumstances surrounding an animal making a logical fallacy. I'd be really interested to hear this.
There's a when lower species of apes, when a infant dies, for example, the mother will carry around the ape, the dead child, not recognizing that it's dead, or not. That's a logical fallacy. That's a failure to understand what has actually happened.
And which law of logic has that ape violated by carrying around a dead? Maybe I mean.
Well, now we're jumping between reason and logic. Now, logic, as I said before, is the formalization of reasonable thought. It's the ability to communicate. Reason is a natural process that happens in our minds. Logic is the language we use to represent that process of thinking. So when an ape fails to recognize that the child is dead, it's failing to recognize a fact. Now, other species do recognize when others die, and as a matter of fact, some even have rituals for death. So from that point of view, there's a lot of evidence.
Maybe their ritual.
That alone is a ton of evidence for animals having limited, reasonable thoughts.
Well, I don't quite see it the same way. And, how do you know that the ritual of the ape isn't to carry around the dead baby?
It could be, actually.
Then it wouldn't be violating a law, right? It wouldn't be...
the ape would still have a ritual.
Well, rituals are instinctive. That's the whole point. God makes animals.
Rituals actually are not instinctive. Rituals are things that are built by reason. They're the poetic. What do we say? The poetic expression of things that cannot be expressed with language. That's what ritual is all about.
Yeah, I disagree with you.
I'm sorry, I don't know if you take the Eucharist or not. Do you do that in your tradition?
Well, we don't call it the Eucharist. That's a Roman Catholic terminology.
Okay.
But
I was just
we use
using
the Lord's
common
table.
term.
Yeah, we have communion in our church.
Yeah, it's a ritual to express a truth that is too grand to be expressed with language. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the sacrifice of Jesus and the Last Supper and his act, his great selfless act, that's too big to express with language. It's a huge idea, and it's a huge, beautiful idea. And so as men, we have rituals to express that idea. it's kind of like going to a rock concert. When you go to a concert of your favorite band, if you and I were to go to a concert of our favorite band, let's say, we have a band in common and we go, and we obviously have, disagreements about things, but this is something that we have in common, and we go to this concert, and afterwards, we go to our friends and we're like, wow, that was a really great concert, but there really isn't any language to explain the experience. The experience is something that you and I share uniquely that we can reference with language, but language really doesn't express the experience. And that's the whole point of ritual, is to express that which cannot be expressed with language.
Well, I would disagree that the sacrifice of Christ is something that can be expressed by language. In fact, if it couldn't be expressed by language, you would never know the meaning of the Lord's table.
Well, I didn't mean to say it in a derogatory way. I hope I didn't.
No. I don't take it that way at all. I'm just saying that it is something that's expressible in language. I guess we're at an impasse here because, you don't believe that all men are. Well, you did say that all men are obligated to reason logically.
Well, I think that I don't think that all men are obligated to reason logically.
Okay, great.
I think that in certain cultures, logical arguments are more highly valued than illogical arguments.
Okay, great. Well, I'm glad that you have conceded once again the truthfulness of the tag argument and actually are now a Christian.
No, I appreciate your humor.
Well, this is my culture. You just stepped into my culture, and in my culture, those who disagree with me actually agree with me.
Well, not necessarily, because I still don't see, because part of the argument is also that logic comes from God, and that's actually a jump. That's a logical jump that you have to prove. Logic could come from Zeus.
Well,
you can't.
Zeus doesn't make the claim.
You're in a position where you can't exactly
first of all,
prove that it came from God, Zeus, or Shiva, or Osano, or any other god.
Yeah. Well, the problem with all those versions of God is that none of them make the claim that they are the ones that have created man in the image of God.
Oh, certainly they do.
Christianity does. Really? Where can you direct me? I'd love to see
certainly.
where Shiva calls man to come.
Norse mythology is the creation myth is all about man and God coming from the same source.
It's a myth, though. That's the whole point. That's why they call it mythology.
Well, why is Christianity not mythology?
Because it's been proven to be true, and not only that, but it's a precondition for logic.
Well, that's a circular argument, actually.
It is, but it's an argument that you can't reason without it. You can't without this circle. You're left to say that man has invented logic, and
well, man did invent logic.
Well, then logic isn't. Maybe I don't like the invention, and I don't want to use it. But yet you tell me that if I say that, then
you don't have
I'm
to.
substandard.
I will certainly
yes, that's what you said.
If you don't use logic. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can get very far in this world by not using logic.
Yeah, but we all recognize that the person is being illogical. That's the point.
Well, no, because a lot of people aren't trained in the ability to use logic.
Logic is something that comes naturally. Now, there is people that exercise good logic and poor logic. But logic is something that is used naturally, that comes naturally as being made.
I'm sorry, Gene, I interrupted again.
That's okay.
If logic was something that came naturally, we wouldn't need to train people in it. As a matter of fact, I think logic is one of the most difficult subjects for people to understand.
Look, you can take somebody who's 16 years old that's never had a logic class, and you can have them run a red light, okay? And you can walk up to them and say, now, was the light red or was the light green? And they say, well, the light was red. Well, are you sure it wasn't red and green at the same time? They will laugh at you.
Well, but that's
the law of non-contradiction.
That analogy would extend also to chemistry then. I don't have to be a chemist to be a cook.
That's true.
I don't need to know why water burns or why water boils to boil water for my miso soup.
That's true.
I don't have to, that person does not need to know logic to understand that there are consequences.
Yeah. You're right. You're right. But here's the thing.
That analogy really doesn't hold water.
But if they're going to argue, this is the whole point. If they're going to argue against God, they're going to have to use logic to do it. Yet, in a materialistic universe, they can't account for logic. They can't account for immaterial entities such as the laws of logic that are binding on all men at all times.
Oh, certainly. I mean, I think I just did, didn't I?
Well, we'll let our listeners be the judge of that. John, I have appreciated the dialogue.
Okay.
And maybe we'll talk again sometime.
Okay,
Right.
take care.
All right. All right, you're listening to The Narrow Mind. I went and filled my glass with water. Life has been good to me, and God has been good to me. And in fact, while I was up getting my water, I had to ask my call screener there. I said, am I making myself clear? Because apparently John from L.A. and myself, we're not connecting. We're not connecting. Let me give out the phone number once again. We do have time for at least maybe one or two more calls. This is your opportunity to call. We've got an open phone board, 800-466-1873. That's 1-800-466-1873. If you'd like to call us on the local line, our number is you have to dial 1-619-793-5180. And we're taking your calls live tonight on this special 2-hour edition of The Narrow Mind. John from L.A. seems like a very intelligent guy, very articulate. He's able to vocalize what it is he believes. But for some reason, we are not connecting. And this is, let me just give my recap of what you just heard, because this is what I was trying to say. If the laws of logic are simply the convention of man, then they can't be binding on all men. I mean, that would be like saying that gravity is not binding on all objects. It's a law. It's binding on all men, and yet it's immaterial. But to say that it's man-made is to say that I can take it or leave it. You can't say that it's something that man has developed and then turn around in the same breath and say, but it's not. Well, he did say that all men are obligated at one point, and he said that those that didn't reason logically would be seen as dangerous, humorous, and their arguments would be somehow less valid, that they wouldn't have credibility. So, in my world, if somebody invents something, I'm not obligated to use it. If you invent a car, or if you invent a handy-dandy can opener, then I'm not under any obligation to use it. If logic is simply the discovery of man, well, not even the discovery of man, the invention of man. If it's discovered, that means it always existed, and once again we're back to something that's either eternal or universal. So if it is the convention of man, if it is something that man has developed, then it's not binding on all men. All men are not obligated to reason logically. And then we have chaos, and nothing makes sense. And I hope at least that much came through. But I believe that our audience is sharp. In fact, I think that our audience is very sharp. And so I'm going to leave it at that and allow you to decide based on the conversation if you understand what I'm saying, if what I'm saying made sense. And if so, then you should be a Christian, because only the Christian scriptures tell us that we are made in man's image, and only the Christian scriptures call us to reason with God, with a personal God, not some offshoot of Christianity like Islam, not some concept of pantheism like Hinduism or polytheism or Buddhism, but the personal God who has made us in our own image, or in his own image, and called us to reason logically and truthfully. Let's go to our phones. Let's go to Gail calling from Arkansas. Gail, welcome to The Narrow Mind.
Hi, Gene. I don't really have a question tonight. I just want to say welcome back, and I've missed your show.
Thank you.
And that I'm glad about the work you're doing in Africa, and just say hi.
Thank you. You know, I've thought about you and your sister often because I haven't heard from you in a while.
Well, actually, I emailed you, and I haven't heard back, but then I read on your website you'd been out of town, so you're probably behind your email.
You know what? Actually, yeah, for some reason I didn't get that. I don't remember getting it. Maybe I need to go back and take a closer look. I get a lot of email, and the majority of it is junk mail. So I tried to weed through it, but maybe I accidentally deleted your email. I was curious to find out if you ever received the book that I sent you.
Yes,
Okay.
I have. I haven't actually finished it because I had two going ahead of it, but I have began reading it, and it's actually really good. In my email I sent to you, I guess I shouldn't be ugly, but I'll say hi to Bruce Reeves on your show, too, because I'm sure he's listening. That was my comment that I made in your email. He emailed me and was questioning me about a comment he heard on your show regarding two women in Arkansas who had started going to a Bible-believing church, and he was really upset with me and didn't like my answers back to his email, and kind of in the long run said, well, people who have made irrevocable decisions in their life, I'll not waste my time on, is basically what he said. And so I wrote back and said, well, Bruce, that kind of goes against what you teach, because by your doctrine, I'm but an erring child of God, and I can repent and ask to be forgiven and taken back into the fold at any time. And I haven't heard a word from him. So. Well,
that's an interesting point.
Yeah, what he was saying is if you have gone that direction, then you're lost, and I'm not going to waste my time.
Right.
And, you know, by his very own teaching, and I know it well because I lived it my entire life up until I met you, but by his teaching, by his very own teaching, all I would have to do is realize if I felt like I were in error by believing what I believe now and pray, and I could be right back in the Church of Christ, and they'd have to accept me back.
That's right. And you wouldn't even have to be baptized again.
No, and I asked him about that, and he gave me lots of answers about there being a different way to get into Christ for a alien sinner than there is for erring child of God, which I would be considered at this point to him.
Well, it seems to me that you're either a child of God or you're not.
Well, I quoted him a scripture where it says that those that are in Christ shall not be lost. And he contended that even though you're an erring child of God, you're still in Christ. You don't have to be baptized to be Well, first he said you were out of Christ. Then he said, well, you're not in fellowship with Christ, but you're actually, but the scripture says if you're in Christ, you'll be saved. So he never really answered that to my contentment anyway.
Well, what's interesting is that he wrote me an email recently. He asked me about some debates between Arminians and Calvinists. And so I told him where he could find those. And I'm not sure if he's listening to him yet, but maybe he's got a debate that he's practicing or polishing up for, or,
He said to me that he had two debates, because I wrote back and asked him. I didn't actually ask him. I kind of made the comment that it seemed like he was taking it very personal that Irene and I had stopped going to the Church of Christ and began attending otherwise. And, not to feel bad about that we felt like that God led us to that debate, and that he shouldn't feel that he was responsible in something that he feels like is a bad thing that has happened. And I kind of said, well, I don't really understand myself why you spend so much time listening to Gene Cook's radio programs and looking at his website and keeping on posting things on your website is basically what I was trying to make him see. That I said, worrying like that about all these things is not healthy, and I hate to see you do that. And that very much offended him. He wrote me back and told me that he spent very little time thinking about us. We rarely crossed his mind, and that he rarely listens to your show, that someone else had emailed him and told him about it. But, it's the same to me. If he's listening or if he has all of his Church of Christ friends listening and calling him or emailing him and telling him exactly what you say, there's no difference. He's keeping up with it either way. So.
Yeah, if I remember the context of my comments, what happened was, I don't know if you listened to it, but if I recall, I think somebody asked me, they said, with all the debates that you do you ever see any positive effects? And I recall that was the question, and that's when I cited.
Right,
I
did listen to it.
Yeah, I think that's when I said, well, there's 2 women that I know of that have stopped attending the Church of Christ and are now attending a Bible-believing church or a Bible church of some type. So it's really good to hear from you. I'm glad also that you are reading that book, because that book is real. That book really helped me, especially with some of the issues that you were asking me about.
Right. Well, I really appreciated that you sent it to me. And my biggest thing that I've had to really focus on that was so foreign to me, and I think I spoke with you on the phone a while back, and you said this is exactly the way you feel too, the imputed righteousness of Christ, along with the non-imputation of sin. I know a lot of times we talk about the imputed righteousness of Christ, but I don't hear as much said about the non-imputation of sin. And to me, the two have to go hand in hand in order to maintain salvation.
Absolutely. All right, Gail, I've got 2 more people waiting to talk, and I want to try to squeeze them in before the show's over. So I appreciate your call, and please keep in touch and let me know if you have more questions, okay?
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
God
Bye.
bless you. Okay, we're going to go to Sam, and then we're going to go to Michelle after that. Sam, I understand you're calling from overseas.
Yeah, hi, Pastor Gene. Welcome back. You've been missed the last few weeks.
Thank you very much.
I want to comment about a couple of things when you were talking with John, because according to what I heard from John, that's he believed that laws of logic are man-made invention.
Yes, that's what he said.
If they are man-made invention, then you should not be binding at anyone before they were invented. So he cannot go before Aristotle or the Greeks and says, well, the Bible is illogical, because, well, there were no laws of logic invented back then to be binding on anyone.
Right.
And he cannot apply them in a different area where they didn't, like he was saying that pets were being reasonable and rational. How is it some animals are following a man-made invented laws? That's a great point. I don't know how it could happen.
Sam, that's a great point.
So we invent something, and the other thing is, if they are man-made invention, before they were invented, A and non-A could be both true at the same sense at the same time.
Yes.
So it could be that's the door and that's not the door. I think before they were invented, we shouldn't have any human beings or animals on planet Earth, because you don't have logical laws. So this is the sea and this is not the sea. This is poison and this is not poison. Everybody thinks this way, either being drowned or died by poisoning.
Yeah.
So I have no idea what he means. They are man-made. That's one thing. The second, it's comment about what you said, when you don't have an unbeliever that would understand the transcendental argument.
Uh-huh.
I personally get into that quite often, but I think there is one of 2 things. Either they think we must be crazy for claiming that, or they are mixing between what we claim they are able to do and what they are actually doing.
Yeah.
Because what I think is heard by an unbeliever, that we say they are unreasonable and they are irrational and they are immoral, and that's not a single presupposition to say that.
No.
It's because they are reasonable, they are rational, they are moral, and yet they have an outlook on life totally conflict with that, and that gives evidence that they are reasonable in spite of what they profess. The other thing, they usually, I heard it quite often, can you put a transcendental argument in syllogistic form? it be, then Q be, therefore Q, etc. But if I put it in syllogistic form, I'm conceding that they can reason and they can apply logical truth
Without God.
apart from
Right.
transcendental argument.
That's right.
But I'm not conceding that. I'm saying before I even do it. Last thing, so you can squeeze the two coals. Jean was saying that physical laws. He says, no, I'm using physical laws and describe what's there and what we see. And but that's quite a huge leap, because it means he's presupposing the existence of external world that's not all illusion, like what Hindu says.
Yeah.
He's presupposing reliability of senses. He's presupposing memory traces, reliability of memory, identity over time, and all of these things, he has no foundation for them whatsoever. And to start by saying, I'm presupposing, I know physical laws because I can see them.
Yeah.
I don't know if you probably have access to the problem philosophy, Bertrand Russell.
Yeah.
See what he writes on the existence of matter.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of philosophers say they don't even have an objective reality that exists out of their mind. Hume did it, Russell did it, and a few others. And it ends up, you are just the idea of brain in a jar.
Yeah. Brains in a jar.
So,
yeah,
I don't know. I absolutely agree with you. Maybe it's time to either start by re-educating non-believers what they are supposed to be thinking, or I don't know, find someone smarter, or I don't want to sound rude, but on the other hand, if I sound rude, and that's something I shouldn't be doing, we need a standard of morality to apply.
Yes.
And I think until we have an unbeliever get a give at that, we can live by their folly for some time.
Yes.
Thank you, Gene.
Sam, here's the thing, and this is what I'm going to say before I say goodbye to you. If they understand the transcendental argument, then they will become Christians.
Absolutely.
That's why we don't have...
Or actually, they might do something else. They might do like Satan. They say, yeah, he knows God. He understands it very well. But
That's
they say,
true.
hey, I don't want him, and I want to go. I would rather go to hell or be God for myself.
That's true.
It's either one. But I don't see anything in between.
Yeah. Okay, Sam. You're calling from the Persian Gulf?
Yes.
What time is it?
It's about 6 o'clock in the morning.
Well, thank you for listening, Sam. God bless you, brother.
Bless you too.
Okay. Bye. All right. Yeah. See, because if you understand, I guess I would have to give a little bit more explanation there on what I meant. I'd have to, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't even think of it right now. But I would have to say that it's not enough just to understand the transcendental argument for the existence of God, but if you concede to it, then you'd have to become a Christian. I guess that's what I meant. Let's go to our last call of the evening. Let's go to Michelle calling from Oceanside. Michelle, welcome to the Narrow Mind.
Hi, Dean. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, okay. I run a discussion group in Oceanside called the Agnostics, and
Yes.
I've been trying to get religious people to show up, but I guess they're afraid or something. I don't know. We've had very few religious people show up, and I was just wondering if you could help me get more religious people to come to our meetings. Then we could have discussions on religion, whereas currently, because so few religious people were coming, now we talk about politics or we last talked about illegal immigration, which has nothing to do with religion. But I know that you went to an atheist coalition meeting, or not atheist coalition, an atheist meetup in San Diego.
Yeah, actually.
And I was like, you know what? It would be great to. I know they were kind of cold to you, but I would love to have you or somebody like you come to my group, and I'd welcome you with open arms.
Okay. I will. Are you the one that somebody from Oceanside's been not emailing me, but maybe they sent one email and one private message to the website? Was that you?
Yeah, that was me.
Okay, great. I haven't got a chance to respond to all the email that I received while I was gone, but I was definitely interested in that email. So,
oh, good.
if you send me another email, let me know when the next meeting is, the time and the date. I'll check my calendar. If I'm available, I'll be there. I'll write you back a confirmation saying I'll be there.
Awesome.
I only have one request though, and that is that that you guys give me permission to record the meeting so that I can use it for training purposes.
Oh, sure.
All right.
I don't think that would be a problem.
Okay, I'll be looking for that email then.
Okay, all right. Take care.
God bless you. All right. Yeah. When I say God bless you to an unbeliever, I mean may God bless you and give you the ability to actually believe the gospel, to understand who Christ is. Folks, I'm convinced. I've been around the world. I've been talking to Christians, non-Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, you name it. I'm convinced with all of my heart that Christianity, just as it says on our homepage, Christianity is the only defendable worldview that is available to man. That's it. It's the only defendable worldview. Out of all the worldviews that are out there, Christianity is the only one that makes sense. And I truly mean that. Christianity is not the call for man to take a blind leap of faith, as so many believe. So many unbelievers, and I know this is true even of Derek Sansone. I could see it in his email. So many unbelievers think that faith is the antithesis of reason. It's not. Biblical faith is 100% compatible with a reasonable approach to the world in which we live in. It's that simple. I mean, I'm the type of person, when I became a Christian, I asked a lot of questions, believe me. And I'm still asking a lot of questions. It's just gotten harder and harder to find people that can answer them, and some of which I have no answers for. I believe that it's Christianity or the highway. It's either Christianity or you're left, like Sam said from the Persian Gulf there, Russell and Hume. If you reject Christianity, then you are led to a position of utter skepticism. You're either left to a position of utter skepticism or you're left to a position that is in tension with itself. It's self-contradictory. I can remember when I was in the 8th grade. You know, I wasn't raised in a Christian home, but when I was in the 8th grade, my English teacher, he told us, he says, have you ever heard that song, Dust in the Wind? In fact, it had just come out. It probably came out in 1977 or 1978. He said, have you ever heard that song, Dust in the Wind? And the class said, yes. And he says, well, that's what we are. Now, as I play this song on the way out of here, I want you to think about this for a minute. If this is what we are, if this is all there is, then nothing really matters. You've been listening to The Narrow Mind. My name's Gene Cook. Until next week.